Good evening, everyone. I am Zoe Ryan. I'm the director here at the Hammer, and it gives enormous pleasure to see you all here this evening. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's talk by Hilton Als. Hilton is not only a renowned author and critic at The New Yorker, but also a curator of some extraordinary exhibitions, including, as many of you know, the Hammer's 2022 exhibition, Joan Didion, What She Means. Tonight, Hilton will discuss the work of the celebrated photographer, Diane Arbus. This is the first of two programs with Hilton at the Hammer this spring, and I hope you'll all return on April 15th, where I'll be honored to be in conversation with Hilton about the art of curating. So mark your calendars. We are deeply grateful to all of our Hammer members and supporters, and tonight we are especially appreciative to be joined by Hammer Board of Advisors member Susan Bay-Nimoy, whose support make programs like this possible. Tonight's talk is presented with the UCLA Department of Art History and reflects our ongoing commitment to bringing world-class scholarship to our visitors, our students, free of charge. Now, I am pleased to ask art historian George Baker, the Walter Hopps Chair in Modern and Contemporary Art in the Department of Art History, to introduce tonight's program.
Thank you, Zoe. Good evening. My name is George Baker. I'm the chair of the Department of Art History at UCLA, and I am really thrilled tonight to introduce Hilton Als as our current honoree in our department for the 2025-26 UCLA Art Council Distinguished Scholar Lectureship in Art History. A bit of a mouthful, but I have some history to share. This is a biennial, sometimes annual, but mostly every other year, special event in our department, hosting each time a series of public lectures, events, and seminars by a key figure in our field. Recent honorees over the past years have included Hal Foster, Sally Stein, T.J. Clark, Thierry Dedeuve, and Geeta Kapoor. We trace this lectureship, a bit of history, back to support from the former UCLA Art Council, whose history began long ago in the 1950s and 1960s when, as a former key organization in the art world of LA, it was convened as a patronage group for the arts on our campus by the painter, curator, and museum director Frederick White. The Art Council's activity broadly supported the visual arts at UCLA, sponsoring major museum exhibitions a generation prior to the formation of the current Los Angeles museum landscape, and helped to establish major collections on our campus, such as the Franklin D. Murphy Sculpture Garden. The Art Council championed a wide panorama of campus art institutions then in formation, UCLA exhibition venues, past and present, the Department of Art, Art History, and Design, which used to be one unified department, and the Arts Library. It also funded many student scholarships, endowed a professorial chair, and was involved in presenting public lectures. And so the UCLA Art Council Distinguished Scholar Lectureship in our department in art history continues this legacy. Given Hilton Als' recent curatorial collaboration with the Hammer Museum, his truly singular 2022 exhibition, Joan Didion, What She Means, the extension of this invitation to visit UCLA art history was, I want to say, and I hope, inevitable. Returning to the original motivations, indeed, of the UCLA Art Council funding, this occasion brings our different parts of the university today and our campus back together in a way that I'm quite joyful about, actually, with art history hosted tonight by and collaborating here with the Hammer Museum. So I should immediately thank the Hammer Museum for this collaboration on behalf of my colleagues in art history and our students. And especially I'm grateful to the support of the director, Zoe Ryan, who will join Hilton on stage, just to pronounce this, at our next event in this series, which will happen on April 15th. And I also want to thank the amazing Claudia Bestor and Shannon Sinova and museum staff around their always extraordinary public events here at the museum. We will hope to gather with colleagues from art and other UCLA departments around Hilton's graduate seminars, which will be offered on campus in April around the coming event that month. But this is the crux of how I want to introduce Hilton to you all tonight. Our invitation to Hilton Als is inspired by the singular way in which his work has been devoted to a profound reimagination of bridging and connection itself, of art history with art criticism and writing and curation, always inventing new ways of working between our fields. And this is what the lectureship, I think, this year wants to recognize. I'll just start with Hilton Als as a critic. I still remember vividly, I would say, my first encounter with his art criticism, which I believe, in my memory at least, this is what my mind today tells me, which I believe was his review of the now notorious Whitney Biennial in 1993. I remember where I was when I read that piece of writing. It was in my grimy and somewhat dark and occasionally cockroach-filled apartment in New York City near Fulton Street that I shared with some mixed friends, male and female, gay and straight, black and white, where I was reading Al suddenly invoking RuPaul in that year of the album Supermodel of the World, which was actually always blasting in our apartment that year, and then something about greasy hose. I guess the word hoe is what I just used, but it'd be better if Hilton was here saying it. I still ponder this review. A new voice, for sure. As a critic, Als had come up writing for publications like Vibe and The Village Voice, and then began contributing to The New Yorker by 1989, becoming a staff writer by 1994. We are thus, with this lectureship, celebrating nearly 40 years of critical labor, during which Als has become one of our most panoramic, I would say, cultural critics and public voices, and accordingly, his cultural criticism was recognized by a Pulitzer Prize in the year 2017. As a writer, Al's almost unclassifiable books, or the essay collections, autobiographical explorations, memoirs, portraits, include by now The Women from 1996, the prize-winning White Girls of 2013, and the more recent portrait of the musical genius, as I always called him, that we all call Prince, among other things, entitled My Pinup from 2022. For his creative writing, he's received a Guggenheim Fellowship in the year 2000, was a finalist for the National Books Critics Circle Award in 2014, and received the Lambda Literary Award that same year. He's currently working, and I hope I do not have this information wrong, but this is what I have been told, on a new book related to an essay published last year in The New Yorker entitled Finding a Family of Boys, a shattering piece that chronicled Al's movement from the world of women and his Brooklyn youth and family life to his early college years studying art history at Columbia. As a curator, I can't summarize all of this activity, and we'll return to it in April at the second of our events with Hilton. Als has helped to establish artists like Alice Neal as newly central and revealed, and in unprecedented exhibitions devoted to figures such as Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Joan Didion, of course, and most recently the writer John Reese. He's often organized exhibitions, often organized exhibitions involving constellations of artworks in relation to the work of a writer or a body of writing. This is another kind of crossing and of connection, I want to say. And these movements of writing and criticism and curating in art history with one activity like writing, looking mutually at and crossing over into the arenas of the visual arts. This is the scenario we come intimately to know, of course, in Hilton Als' words, his imagination, and all his extraordinary work as a writer. What I'm talking about is what the psychoanalyst long ago named identification, about all the possible forces that constantly open up as opposed to consolidate what we call our identities, about the rupture of static, imprisoning categories. There are so many passages in Al's writing that speak to this, but since we're here at the Hammer in the aftermath of his Joan Didion show, I'm just going to quote briefly as I end this introduction from Al's essay for that exhibition catalog. Writers look, if they are up for it, to those stories that describe something of the self to the self. Sometimes one can find the stories that speak to and of oneself in places and among people who bear little, if any, resemblance to who we are or are supposed to be. End of the quote. Als was speaking, of course, about Joan Didion here, but I think he's also, of course, speaking about his own work. And so I invoke this thought from Al's writing as we welcome him tonight to lecture on the photography of Diane Arbus, as we welcome then a writer who has transformed what we call a portrait in prose, what we call in English with the photographically significant word, usually a profile, to ponder one of the artists who did the most to transform what we call a portrait in photography. Of course, we're facing another crossing. And with that, I want to welcome to the stage Hilton Als. Just as he comes on, we have a Q&A after and a book signing with Hilton after, but hold your questions until someone from the staff brings you a microphone. Hilton.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like Barbara Streisand in Central Park when she said, I ain't done nothing yet. Thank you, George. And thank you, Zoe, for such an incredible welcome and introduction this evening. And I also want to thank Susan Nimoy. Is she here? She's here, yes? She was incredibly welcoming to me through Annie Philbin when we were working on the Joan Didion show, and it was just one of the great special Los Angeles events for me, so thank you again. But Zoe and George are caring people, and I don't think any of us would be here without Annie Philbin opening the door and letting us in. I have a great feeling that Diane Arbus would have loved her as much as we do. I mean, look at that face. How can I resist? The whole family sort of looked like some version of Montgomery Clift. Beautiful. So I'm going to read something I'm very happy to say her daughter, Dune, liked very much. And it's an essay called Diane Arbus in Manhattan. I'd reviewed her book Untitled in the New Yorker, and then she kept coming back to me as a thought and as an artist. And so I wanted to write something to her and for her, and that's what you'll hear this evening. It's called Diane Arbus in Manhattan. For a number of years now, Diane, for months and days, I have been sitting with your pictures, black and white photographs that have changed the world and have changed me. And taken together are the photographic equivalent of what cineasts have said about Orson Welles' 1941 black and white masterwork, Citizen Kane. Your images have done more to inspire people to go to art college than any other modern photographic image maker in history. And your influence and myth is so pervasive and conclusive. After looking at your work, one has to readjust one's vision, which perforce fucks with or trivializes your more mundane photo-making contemporaries, that our present-day reality looks less real for you, not having seen it first. Your vision rests on my eyes and shoulders like a solid, something I have to adjust and readjust in order to keep moving, because many of your pictures feel like the last word, about queerness, about coupling, about people finding their own society or not, their own consuming, their own costuming or not, in temporary homes and nudist camps and movie theaters, all in one or near your great narrative, which is to say, Manhattan. Because that is the way it is with you, Diane. You devoured the island of your birth and gave it back to itself, reimagined but not reconfigured. And I wonder what it could have meant to have that kind of power in a city heavily populated by other people who subscribed to the arrival myth too, even if they've been born in Brooklyn. Because that's Manhattan's dominant or collective story, people arriving and reinventing themselves in a city whose citizens don't so much celebrate the seated man in the bra, the lady in a fur hat, or the kid with the hand grenade, as treat them as figures it's the better part of valor to take note of and move away from, given that one's survival in the city depends, in part, on understanding that New Yorkers crave attention, but will fuck you up if you get in their face. And that's what you did. You got in people's faces. And that's certainly one reason your photographs were spat on by a visitor when they were exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art. I bet your defacer was a New Yorker who saw your work as a double negative, certainly where New York etiquette was concerned. You got in your subject's face and then put their face in the spectator's face. It was outrageous, and you added insult to that particular injury by getting the subjects to agree to it. None of that Cartier-Bresson derived stuff of catching people, events, flowers, cars on the fly. You were in conversation with your sitters, a social exchange resulting in a kind of emotional documentary that became metaphysical as that terrible and beautiful alchemy took place, which is to say the sitter, you looking at the sitter, the cameras click and sometimes flash. You were born and loved and raised children and died in the city, so you were cognizant of Manhattan and her risks. You said, I have this funny feeling, which is that I'm never afraid when I'm looking in the ground glass. This person could be approaching you with a gun or something like that, and I'd have my eyes glued to the finder, and it was like I wasn't really vulnerable. It just seemed terrific what was happening. I mean, I'm sure there are limits. God knows when the troops start advancing on me, you do approach that stricken feeling where you perfectly well can get killed. But I bet you perfectly well knew, Diane, that you weren't going to get killed because you had charm on your side and frankness, an infectious combination. I think I'm kind of two-faced, you said, describing your part in the drama of the sitting, working your way into your subject's pores, their soul, a process that revealed as much about you as it did them. You continued, I'm very ingratiating. It really kind of annoys me. I'm just sort of a little too nice. Everything is, ooh. I hear myself saying, how terrific. And there's this woman making a face. I really mean it's terrific. I don't mean I wish I looked like that. I don't mean I wish my children looked like that. I don't mean in my private life that I want to kiss you. But I mean that's amazingly, undeniably something. Among the somethings you photographed in the 1960s was the incomparable Stormé de Laveraye. Born in New Orleans in 1920 to a white mother and a black father, Stormé was a star at the Jewel Box Review in the East Village. It was one of the city's first integrated drag clubs. There, Stormé was a gentleman MC. Dressed in a dark suit or tuxedo, she introduced and supported the ladies who had what Stormé did not. In any case, I got to interview the great black star for one of the Voice's queer pride issues, and I can't remember the year, but I remember this, Stormé telling me you were such a charmer, Diane, hanging around backstage. This was when queer people could be busted for being queer, or more likely blackmailed for it, and yet the stars at the Jewel Box trusted you, and I think part of the high for them and for you was the then novel experience of a more or less straight white woman hanging out in a place she had no business being and finding the habitués, if not beautiful, then at least interesting. You loved the various tensions. You said, I work from awkwardness. By that, I don't mean, by that, I mean I don't like to arrange things. If I stand in front of something, instead of arranging it, I arrange myself. This is an extraordinary statement, one that gets to the heart of your New York heart. New Yorkers adapt themselves to any situation, even fear of love. We run from vulnerability, not only because we can, but because we feel we must. This city is eating us alive. Time is eating us alive. There is never enough of any of it, time, ourselves, to go around to all that diversity. And yet we do arrange ourselves around that difference, the better to understand it and ourselves and our life in the city. As an artist, Diane, you lived in worlds where being white didn't have much cachet, but being Jewish did. Everybody in New York knows about the Jews' history of difference, even when they don't, because everyone is black or Jewish or a woman, a refugee from worlds where they had to adjust or continually rearrange themselves, not so much to fit in as not be killed. And if the charming such as yourself are not survivors, then I don't know who is. In any case, you weren't immune to Stormy's charms either. I love the flirt in your portraits of her, some of which were taken on a park bench in what I assume is Central Park because of the topography. It's too hilly to be Washington Square Park, another New York public area you treated like a private studio. For a while, you treated Coney Island and Times Square that way too. New York was your studio. In a 1968 letter to the British editor, Peter Cookson, you wrote, as only a quintessential New Yorker could have written, I haven't been to the country, not even Coney Island, but the parks have turned so pretty. For weeks, I wandered in them, just photographing babies like I was everyone's mother. Oh, Diane, you did actually mother, and your legacy continues in the oddest ways. For instance, how amazing, to borrow one of your words, to meet and be with Stormy years after you met her, and to feel her embrace before I left off interviewing her. It remains one of the great erotic moments of my young life. Her muscles and breasts pressed against me, a memory that leads to another, which was visiting Stormy at Henrietta on Hudson, a bar on Hudson Street in Lower Manhattan. It was maybe a year or two after I'd interviewed her, and she was working as a bouncer, and I went to visit with a female friend and her colored male lover, a man who looked not unlike Stormy. And I remember on that afternoon, Stormy brought my female friend a drink, and she fell for my friend right in front of us because my female friend had what you had, Diane, charm. But the world was different already. You didn't have to go to the jewel box to find queer people who expressed themselves. It was all out there in the open, presumably. That's the last time I talked to Stormy, I think. It was spring, and already the girls were out in their summer dresses. Life in Manhattan, with its pebbles in the concrete, its big time, small town attitude, and private life in public spaces. You knew every bit of it, or nearly every bit of its nearly 23 miles land area all told. How do Manhattanites do it? Pack in an average of 70,000 people per square mile. It's the most densely populated borough of the 5 boroughs that make up New York City. And what about the dense population of spirits that first made Manhattan? Let's start with the Lenape Indians, and then in 1524, the Florentine explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano entering the Narrows on his ship. And oh, history is so murky and cruel. And before you know it, the Dutch were buying in what they called New Netherland from the Lenapes, and how horrible. Peter Stuyvesant came along in 1624 because of Dutch fur trading. But I'm getting it wrong. The fur business, which your family was in, was set up on a trade settlement that was Governor's Island. But wait, there was Peter Stuyvesant in 1647 being appointed Dutch Director General of the colony, also known as Manhattan, or maybe that was some other time. In any case, the English took over in 1664 and renamed the island New York after the Duke of York. And somehow the Dutch were still around, and it's interesting, all the blood that's shed and corruption that kills and plain order that goes into making a place, not to mention the ghosts. And in any case, you knew nearly every part of Manhattan, Diane, having lived in so many areas of it. And about that blood, I want to say a few words here about the war, the Second World War. Your family were made even more prosperous during that time. And when we look at your characters in the myth of the city, I see shattered beings left over from the war, people who didn't make it, just as millions didn't come back from Buchenwald, from the Gold Coast in Africa, from India. I think the war helped you become a generalist of sorts, a generalist interested, interred in, and committed to the general. Wars can do that, make you true to the suffering and disfiguring elements of the world. It contributed to the brilliance of your observations and your subjectivity. In Manhattan, Diane, you lived in so many areas. You spent your first 2.5 years from 1923 until mid 1924 or so at 115 West 73rd Street. I have been there. From mid 1924 until 1929, you lived with your family at 1133 Park Avenue near 90th Street. I have been there. From 1929 until late 1931, you lived with your family at 1185 Park Avenue. I have been there. And in 1932, you moved with your family to the San Remo, an imposing, elegant apartment building on Central Park West. I have also been there. Subsequent homes you shared with your parents, husband Alan, and then your children as a single parent include 888 Park Avenue, 319 East 72nd Street, 118 East 68th Street, 131 and a half Charles Street, 120 East 10th Street, and the last, apartment 945B in Westbeth, a block-long housing complex bound by West Street, Bethune Street, Bank Street, and Washington Streets. It was the former home of Bell Laboratories, where inventors worked on the transistor radio, television, and a few other things. But by 1966, Bell Laboratories was out and using seed money from the J.M. Kaplan Fund and with support from the National Endowment for the Arts, a renovation got underway, the purpose of which was to create living and working spaces for 384 artists working in different disciplines. And you moved in and you died there in 1971, and I have not been there. Not in your death, but to the door that says 945B, and there's a black triangle on the door indicating that the flat is in fact a duplex. The hallway leading to and away from that door is lit as Jean-Luc Godard lit the hallways in Alphaville, with a light that feels like supersonic screeching, utilitarian but ugly, and I can see your brown hair in that light, which was familiar to me from the projects one of my sisters lived in and raised her children in before love saved her and didn't save her, and she bought a house. 888 Park Avenue, 71 Washington Square Place, Westbeth. All of it adds up to a kind of Diane Arbus museum, or perhaps more accurately, a series of museum arcades with archways that read achievement and commodities during the time you lived with your parents, stars of the merchant class leading into other kinds of arcades filled with, eventually, with what critics have called perverse commodities, but which I call germane to your interest and dreams, and magic such as the stuff you found in penny arcades, in Hubert's Museum, in Times Square, with its fleas and jungle creep, and all the other curiosities that are New York. In her poem, New York, Marion Moore wrote, New York, the savage's romance, accreted where we need the space for commerce, the center of the wholesale fur trade, starred with teepees of ermine and people with foxes. It was as if Moore was writing certain aspects of your autobiography, Diane, certainly when it came to the family business. And I'm telling you another thing. I know from your pictures, or the world of your pictures, that savage and romance are words you understand in any description of New York, because that was the world of your pictures. It took you more than 20 years to become yourself, the Diane Arbus of the Black and White Twins, and loser at a diaper derby, and Jewish giant at home, and girl in a shiny dress, and so on. And in a way, your sentimental education could be described as passing from the romance one associates with your background, which you have described as feeling unreal, to you finding the savagery in New York streets and arcades that wiped away the gunk of respectability that made your flesh crawl, which may have included the makeup of your mother's generation with its furs and pearls and servants, and leaving the touching of children to the nanny and other servants in other rooms, closed off, children muted by rugs and windows and bed dusters, and again those nannies who spoke the language of love in an unknown tongue. It's funny, but sometimes when I think of you as a young girl growing up in Manhattan and then becoming the artist you became, I see a coat, and the coat has a fur collar, and then as you became an artist, the fur collar starts to molt, and your coat goes from something like velvet to something like wool. The pattern is bumpy. In any case, my dream of your overcoat is probably based on the women I knew growing up in the 1960s. Those women in their cloth overcoats went to market with not much else but those coats, and their charm and eyes, trying to get more with less to feed their families. And that's what you did, too. You worked your way backwards, economically speaking, to understand something of survival. You evolved into a woman who explored the world market filled with people, customs, rituals, gay women, disasters, connections, love, Christmas trees, fake sets in Disney World, the better to understand what you might have wrought in the world. In a 1960 postcard to your friend Marvin Israel, you wrote, "I am sitting in the meat market waiting for the heads." And in a 1968 note to producer Stuart Stern, you said, "I think it's better to start from scratch than anywhere." It's interesting how relatively few female interpreters of your work there have been, but Susan Sontag, for one, was never what you might call a feminist. In any case, I think she, and eventually other writers such as Janet Malcolm, categorized your ambition, the ambition of the artist, as distinctly male, and your eye as a kind of ripoff, taking from the world what it needed, but giving nothing back. But how to explain your interest in continuity and narrative, going back again and again, to explain your interest in the world, to see the kids in Washington Square Park and the kids in Untitled, and Loro, the dwarf, and the 1968 series labeled Catherine Bruce Catherine, which are pictures about transformation, among other things. But you had to wait for those images, wait for Bruce to get done up, to show and not show himself to you. And in that waiting, you were different than Frank and Winogrand and the others you sometimes get lumped in with, because you weren't treating the images you weren't treating the image as a kind of journalism, but the record of a fantasy of magic ground through the glass of the real. Shaping metaphors out of the real is the work of an artist, or those artists who know there's something better on the other side of daydreaming, such as Bruce Catherine's dream that she's Catherine Bruce. Both are real, both are manufactured, and both are citizens of Manhattan. "Someone told me it's spring," you wrote to Marvin Israel in 1960, "but today everyone looked remarkable, all odd and splendid as freaks, and nobody able to see himself, all of us victims of the special shape we come in." Much has been made of your subjects and their various shapes, but your subjects wouldn't have made those shapes without your humility, the near religious belief that your subjects, to borrow one of your words, was terrific, because they longed to be seen as much as you wanted to see and believe in them. But you weren't pious about the exchange, just ecstatic when it worked, and as ecstatic and calm as Walt Whitman was when he wrote in 1900, "Manhattan streets I sauntered, pondering on time, space, reality, on such as these and abreast with them, prudence. The soul is of itself, all verges to it, all has reference to what ensues. All that a person does, says, thinks is of consequence. The indirect is just as much as the direct. The spirit receives from the body just as much as it gives to the body, if not more." Most of us believe in a specious world of rights, gay rights, women's rights, animal rights, because we want to feel our moral barometer never gets scratched, let alone broken, because we want our better selves to prevail and for the world to be a good and green place. We treat civil rights as though it was a freeing agent or a magic cure for the world's alienation or your alienation, but that's just jive if you really think about it. Loneliness surrounds us like a Jesus halo, especially in Manhattan, where privacy is and always shall be a Jane Jacobs issue. How do we negotiate space in the city and avoid emotional collisions as you make yourself socially acceptable to what? Other compartmentalized people who probably do what you do, which is to not give a thought to your civil rights as you reveal yourself to others in the lovely dark and only in the dark. Part of the greatness of, let's say, contact sheet number 4457, where we see a black man kissing or otherwise fondling a scantily clad white woman and then gently holding a nude Arbus, so to speak, across his lap, is the conversation you bring to the fore as no one else could, and that conversation is about miscegenation, an ever-present taboo. In the contact sheet, Diane, you show the questions propriety prohibits, but we ask in the dark, or most of us would like to ask in the dark. What does it mean for white skin to be draped across black skin? What does it mean to look at another white woman draped across his black skin? Do we, the white women, feel the same draped across that black skin? You upset the balance of propriety of the status quo by asking those questions and dig it. Your white skin against that black skin upset Janet Malcolm enough so that she revealed her own associative racism when she wrote of your book, Revelations. Here in, quote, here in place of the base metal of unreliable, self-serving hearsay, we have the solid gold of letters and diary entries and compositions written by Arbus herself. These are quoted at length and accompanied by great numbers of photographs of family members and friends and Arbus herself. And guess what? Arbus comes out looking just as brooding and morbid and sexually perverse and absurd. The chronology actually shows a photograph of a naked Arbus lying across the lap of a half-dressed black man, unquote. Shock, horror, basta. Diane, it's clear that you didn't use a flash during the sitting because that black skin, a double negative, photographically speaking, and erotically speaking, something else entirely, doesn't have much definition. But I think the point of the pictures is to remind us that New York will always be full of secrets like miscegenation, a pairing that still startles the eye when you pass it on the street in Manhattan because it's still attached to narratives of dominance and submission, issues that poke the city's fabled liberalism in the eye. But this was nothing new to you. In 1968, you produced The Extraordinary, a Young Man. In 1968, you produced The Extraordinary Young Man and His Pregnant Wife in Washington Square Park, New York City, 1965. In it, one sees a black man with what used to be called conked or straightened hair, the hair of a hipster or a pimp, and his arm is draped around his wife, who wears her beehive and glasses like a totem, just as her husband's blackness is a kind of totem too. In 1969, you photographed children's fashions for the New York Times. The shoot took place in St. Thomas, a world of tall grass and heat, not your usual world, but you made it your world by casting the shoot with local kids. And I love the pictures, particularly the picture of the little girl in the shorts and jumper standing with a little boy who's slightly hiding. From what? You, the sun? You were the director, and always in your pictures, even the stuff you didn't like much, such as these pictures, has all the New York talk going on in them, which is to say analysis, as you look for meaning and feeling. In any case, the fashion editor, Patricia Peterson, collaborated with you on the images, and aside from the anti-fashion move of populating casting, the assignment with real people, you dared show blackness and whiteness together. To your former husband, but always best friend, Alan Arbus, you wrote about the shoot. There was a bit of trouble. Pat said it was because the cover photo was of a black girl and a white boy about 4 years old holding hands. They wanted to retake, which I think she has effectively blocked. She was full of appreciation for the most minor virtues of the photos, and as for miscegenation, junior style, it may end up being regarded as a major civil rights breakthrough if they finally let it pass. Unquote. This observation, with its little sigh of emotional and political exhaustion at the end, is precisely the sad fatigue that permeates Elizabeth Hardwick's great 1980 short story, Crosstown. In that piece, and in the subsequent pieces she wrote late in her career about New York, the author paints in those bits that Jane Jacobs sketched so widely and brilliantly in her seminal 1961 study, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. If Jacobs looked at Manhattan through a telescope, Hardwick looked at it through a microscope, and her lens was bathed in a savage romanticism. There was no easy choice between the Kentucky native and her adopted city, which infected her as it infected you. As a love that could not be cured, Hardwick wrote, under the moon, quote, under the moon, the taxi makes its way through the dark park, and a cassette of Rachmaninoff passes perhaps over the buried imprint of its own footsteps. Here, back once more, awaiting the appearance of the night man, my neighbor can be seen walking her dog, a snub-nosed animal, the dog, with a strange, dry body, like a tanned hide, a dog such as you see wandering in poor countries on the back streets of the West Indies. Reading that quote, Diane, I can hear you in conversation with Lizzie. She was just your speed, a Manhattanite down to her skinny bones, and maybe in response to her dog story, you might have said, as you said once, I don't particularly like dogs. Well, I love stray dogs who don't like people. And that's the kind of dog picture I would take if I ever took a dog picture. Life in New York, is it a dog's life? Hardwick continues with her neighbor's dog because all New Yorkers are noble-minded snoops. She writes, maybe it was such a dog that killed Verrazano when he went on from the East River and the Hudson River to the Caribbean. Such a dog, and not the natives at all. Well, as we say today, that is what you pay for New York City. Thank you. I wanted to show you this this photograph in particular. I wanted to end with it because it's the first image I ever saw of hers, and it was in an Esquire. I think my mother brought home a bunch of magazines from where she was working, and I was leafing through it. So I was about 10, and there was a little portfolio about this person named Arbus who had taken her own life, and the art directors loved her, and this was the first photograph that I saw, and I thought that I was truly dreaming it, that it was such an incredible photograph because it was a feeling about my own parents, right? That we used to go, I used to love to go to the beach with them because it was they got along at the beach. And so she was, I thought it was a dream. Later I learned that she was photographing at a nudist colony in New Jersey. And she said that what you first notice at a nudist colony is what people are wearing. So they would have their socks on or an apron. And she said, and I think I can remember the quote accurately, where she says that it's sort of awful, the lake is kind of oozing and there's bobby pins on the ground. And it's almost as if you've entered Eden, she said, and God said, all right, you people, just go muck it up. And we did. And so she's an extraordinary writer, a great, great writer on top of everything else. And so this is my introduction to her work was, it was almost as if I dreamt it. do you ever have that feeling when you look at a painting or a photograph or you read something that really means something to you? It's almost as if you conjured the image or the words. And so she has had that effect on me for many years now, of sort of conjuring a world that I thought I'd already been in, but hadn't been. I think she was very interested in myths, and she was a huge Borges fan. So one of the people that she read and loved a lot was Borges, and storytellers about myth, places that did and didn't exist simultaneously. But I encourage you to look up her writing, which is in a book. The print is really small, but just take your time with it because it's she's a great writer. Yeah. She started, just to preempt any kind of technical questions, she started taking photographs because she was like a lot of kids of her class, she was encouraged greatly when she showed any ability. And she went to the Fieldston School, which is on the Central Park West, near where her family lived. And she was painting, and she was a very good painter. And she said it was something about the way in which she was encouraged to paint that actually kind of turned her stomach, to the point where she couldn't bear the sound of her brush on the canvas, and photography was a way out. You didn't hear it. You saw it happening, but you weren't involved in the process of being told that it was brilliant. And I think we have to also understand that during the period when she was taking photographs, it was not, there was no money in it. She was always teaching or doing freelance work because there was no market for it. No one knew what that was. So John Sokowski at MoMA was one of the few people who really took it seriously as an art, and he gave her her first museum exposure was the New Document show. And then when she died, the very famous Diane Arbus show opened, and that was curated by her daughter Dune, who was the baby she was holding, and her partner, Marvin Israel, who had been a great friend of Arbus's. So that's why we know of her, really, is because of that show. And to her, there are 3 monographs that sell the most in photographic world, all by Aperture, and I'm happy to say there are 3 women. It's Arbus, Nan Goldin's Ballad of Sexual Dependency, and Sally Mann's Immediate Family. They're all pictures of intimacy. Okay, I'm not going to be schoolmarm all night. I'm going to be very charming and light. So please, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. There should be someone around with a microphone. You just raise your hand. I'm not allowed to call the person, but there's a person down here. There. Thank you.
Thank you for that talk. I was thinking about where you started your talk with this really evocative phrase, she devoured the city of her birth, and then gave it back or threw it back. I forget what the second verb was. And then where you ended with the myth and this interest in myth.
Yes.
And that first, that opening sentence, I guess, really caught my ear in light of that, because it was almost like an anagrammical quality of she devoured the city of her birth, and there's a very birthing quality to that sentence almost.
Oh, that's nice.
And I was
Didn't occur to me at the time.
No, but I mean, it was just, I was thinking of it in light of where you also ended with this quality of the myth and her camera's own opening up.
Yes.
And I was just wondering whether there's a way to even think about, in light of what you're presenting, a kind of different relationship of the photographic aperture or the camera's aperture to this kind of birthing moment.
Yes. It's funny, I was in San Francisco, and Sally Mann was giving a great talk about mothering and photography and trying to have a career and so on. And I asked her, did she feel that she could be as intimate without obstruction as she was with obstruction, taking care of kids and husband and all that? And there was no real answer to that. I think that what the camera gave her, Arbus, was, I think she says it gives you a kind of license to talk to people that you would never, other people who would never talk to you. That it's a considerable amount of attention to pay to a human being, and that's what she loved about it too, was that it was a machine that gave her access to you or to me, and I think that her relationship to people was I think she was very interested in our private lives. And I think that if you have a camera, people are more willing to let you in than not. But you have to also remember the people she's shooting, these are people that we're trained not to look at, right? I mean, a profound aspect of her work is, I don't remember if it's in this piece, but she writes to Marvin that she saw a woman fall. And part of the revolution of Arbus's work is that she doesn't look away. Women are treated or taught and treated to save the falling woman, to say that to look is rude, right? To look is to not take responsibility for the world, which is what women are taught. They should take responsibility for the falling person. And she didn't, she said, would it have been better to look away? So the question that we're asking is someone who was raised in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, who was taught that she didn't have any real license to look, and yet she grabbed it because she was given this machine that allowed her to do it, but she was trained not to look. There's an extraordinary, if you look it up online, she did a radio interview, I forget, I think WNYC or something found this tape, and it was about feminism. And she says, you have to remember that when I would walk down the street, visiting my parents or whomever, if I was not with a man, people truly did not look at women if they did not have a male companion. And she said, I'm not saying it as a call to arms or anything, it was just a fact that you were invisible. So I think that the visibility of her characters in this mythic city is part of her visibility too. Does that help you? Okay. Sorry, does anyone else have, since I'm here. They paid for my Uber and everything, so I'm happy to be here.
I'm guessing this is somewhat random because it's more for your career, I think.
How dare you? Get out of my theater.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
I'm from New York originally. I grew up reading The New Yorker, and I've read a lot of your, pieces growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know, obviously, Diane Arbus is one of your mentors.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel as a writer you're mentoring the next generation?
Oh my gosh.
Writers?
That's below the belt. I feel actually very fortunate to be a teacher because it's not really a job, it's a vocation. if it was a job, I would want more money for it. One of the things that is happening more and more, and this is something I've noticed, is that more queer kids and women are coming up to me directly to speak and to be in conversation than before. Almost always it was dudes, who felt that they had a right to your attention. It's okay, I'm there. But what's happening now is that queer kids of color and women are stepping up more to ask for help or guidance. And I make a point of taking them to a grown-up dinner when they have talent, and telling them that they have to try harder, that the experience of making work, part of the experience of making work is finding ways to show it or do it. And I just took a wonderful former student from the dramaturgy department at Yale to dinner, and he's working for a theater in San Francisco, and he said that he was so touched that he had two mentors of color, and I almost burst into tears, and one was an actor. And he said, well, I don't know how to make theater in San Francisco. It's racially not so diverse. And I went home and I thought about it, and I wrote to him and I said, Austin, you have to remember that Ntozake Shange made colored girls here. That she went around and she found women who were doing poetry readings, and started to make a little bit of a collective, and they perform in bars and they made work together. So one of the things that I encourage all students is to use your imagination. I think that something has happened. I hope parents don't get mad at me about this, but something has happened where the thing is given as opposed to earned. And so my big job is to love them and tell them you have to earn this stuff. And Ntozake Shange didn't know anybody. She was just teaching, but she had a vision. And so if you have a vision, we need it, but you have to do it. That's the part I can't do. But I love that it's more and more of those kids coming to me. Thank you. Yay! Yeah, no. Yes. So he's all fired up now, and another student who's a brilliant playwright, I put them together. They're gonna do little shows in the rehearsal room. It's just step by step. Yeah. I love talking to you, so please, there are two people. Oh, there's a young person there. Hello.
Hello. So I'm curious to know about the influences on Arbus of other photographers.
Okay.
Particularly in light of the picture magazines.
Yes.
And the really important work that some women photographers were doing in that context.
Yes. I'm glad that you asked that, because her big and most beloved teacher was Lisette Modell. And so she was taking classes with her at the New School. She and her husband were doing fashion for photographs for her family store. It was called Russex, that's right. And she went to him in 1955 and said, I can't stand it. She was a stylist on the shoes. And she started to take classes with Lisette Modell at the New School, and they became incredibly close. I think another person whose work she loved was James Van Der Zee's pictures of the Harlem Dead, had a profound effect on her. Another photographer, I don't think was a direct influence, but she admired greatly, was Walker Evans. So it was a way of taking the camera and not using as a document making machine, but as a way of looking at each other. When she, there's one other person, oh, Ouija. She wanted to, before she died, she was planning a show of her pictures, Ouija, and James Van Der Zee's Harlem Dead. Isn't that a great show idea? And so it was that kind of startled reaction to what you're seeing that is so profound in all of their work, right? That they're kind of amazed by this thing that's happening, but also that it has no answers. There are no answers to this process. Yes, she really loved her, and Lizette really, when she, so little was known really about her mother. Arbus's mother had been very depressed and catatonic almost at times. And when she tried to talk to her mother about depression, the mother was like, "What are you talking about?" It was so underground at that point that there was no real help for people who were severely depressed. I think it was a genetic issue for her. And I think also there were personal things that came into play, but there was no real conversation about that at that time. But she loved Lizette. There's some questions back there, I see. Oh, there you go.
Here you go.
What does having a vision mean to you?
Do you know that great story about George Balanchine, who's a great choreographer, one of my favorite artists of the world, and they asked him once what his inspiration was. And he said, "The union, dear. We have to be finished by 6 o'clock so the guards and everyone can go home." So I think that vision is not something that you acquire. I think it's something that is germane to who you are. And the work is to find a way to articulate what it is that you see. That's not so easy, right? So she had to go through many stages, fashion, and then she was able to become herself late in her life, so 60 whatever. She starts to take pictures as herself, mid-60s. So I think that you have the desire and you have this way of looking at the world that is yours. I think that the real work is to not shortchange it and take an easy way out, and to find a way to keep at it so that you can articulate what it is that you see and feel. That's really hard. And nobody really gets, I mean, some people get rich from it, but not really. I think that what the reward is really is the work. It's almost as if it's something that finds you, ultimately.
I was wondering if I could ask you a question about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I saw somebody going that way.
Forgive
Just
me.
1 second. Yes?
I'm a New Yorker who has lived in this town since 1984, and tonight your remembrances and this discussion made me even more homesick than I was in 1984. I'm an Upper West Sider. I lived on West 85th Street. I used to see John and Yoko rolling Sean in the stroller up Columbus Avenue. I'm educated in New York, Fordham, and St. John's. It had everything to do with the person I am today. And I am grateful for having the experience of growing up on the outskirts of New York and then to experience the life there. I think it is exactly the center of the fiber of my being. I could live here until I die, but I will always be a New Yorker.
Oh,
So thank you.
so thank
It hurts my heart.
Oh, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
But you did.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. I was so appreciative when I was reading and people laughed when she said, "I haven't even been to Coney Island." That's really as far as we go, right? But it's in your bones, yeah. I'm sorry. Can you guys just indicate, because I can't really see, I can just see shadows of people. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Last question, but first of all, just to refrain that, I mean, your lecture sort of sang to me as both not just an elegy to Diane Arbus, but also an elegy to Manhattan. And I like it a whole lot more than Woody Allen's, I must also add. Whole lot more. But I wanted to, one of the things that we see looking at Diane Arbus's work is this trajectory through Manhattan, through the parks, through sort of borderline spaces, if you will, or, everything from just the street edge to the demi-monde to great public squares and parks. But one of the things that I think is fascinating and, is developing even as she's approaching her own death is also this exploration of character and interiority. She goes into these interiors. It's not just, the external Manhattan and New York, or New Jersey, or wherever, but interior spaces. And this, you have this even in the pictures of, say, for example, like the giant with his two parents and so forth. And I'm wondering how you see that evolution, number one. And this is sort of a two-parter question. And speaking of, like, Walker Evans and Walt Whitman, of course, do you think, as I think, Sontag would have radically revised her views?
She did.
After the turn of the century.
She revised her view of Arbus even. I think in a book called Regarding the Pain of Others, she did apologize for not understanding that Arbus was a genius, and that one of the things, so that's the second part of your question. The first part of the question has to do with technique, I think. And when she started, she was doing, she was using a 35 millimeter camera, and she was just on the street, right? So she's walking around. But when she began to use a square format pictures, she was able to get closer to people and to talk to them and to ask if they would be willing to collaborate. So one of the things that's so startling about the pictures is that they're looking at her, right? This is not something Robert Frank or was doing or any of her contemporaries. And so to be in that conversation, I think it was a brilliant choice not to use the 35 millimeter camera after a while and to use a square format 4x5. And that gave her, she was using a Rolleiflex. You would have to look down, you would have to ask them to sit still. And I did an experiment, and I actually forgot about it until this very moment. I love her so much, and I always want to understand, because the more you look at the work, the more mysterious it becomes. So one day after I was teaching at NYU, and I went to the park, the Washington Square Park, and I just sat there for a long time as if, I'm sorry it's not in this talk, but she has this wonderful thing of how she could, the gay women would be in one area, the gay men would be in another area, black people would be here, Puerto Rican women would be here. And she said, I can be anyone, she said, except I could not be any of these people. So she kept going back and back and back. And then she says, and sometimes you just give up and go to the movies. But she would walk around and she would try to arrange herself around these groups. Well, one day when I was in the park, I just sat there and I realized that the aberration in the park was never the pierced kid with 8,000 tattoos. It was the blonde football hero who would walk sometimes occasionally through the park, who was so not in the context of that park that I said, oh my God, she was kind of freaked out by what people are supposed to look like. What didn't freak her out was how we look. So if she saw, let's say this, a picture of hers is a girl with, blonde girl with shiny lipstick, and it's almost sort of monumental. She's looking up, and the girl is a blonde and has this kind of white lipstick. And in any ordinary picture by Winogrand or whatever, she would be an object of beauty. But for Arbus, she was an object of fascination, and I don't really want to kiss you, but that's amazing that you look like that. So just kind of sit in any area, Central Park, or I don't know what the parks are like here, but go to any sort of park where the quote unquote freaks gather, and when you see the guy in perfect health jogging without a shirt on, he looks like a horror. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so that's why she said, she says in the Arbus book, she was talking to someone and she said, I didn't want to take his picture because there was nothing strange about him. So the narrative for her is the subjectivity of our weirdness and our individuality, and how these shapes speak to our individuality as opposed to our general sense. She loves the specific. That's what I was saying, that she was a generalist who loved the specific. The generalist part of it is we're all human beings, and then we get really specific. So I wanted to just show you this one picture again. This is an incredible picture. This is a blind couple on their bed. And the thing that is so extraordinary is the light, right, that they can't see. Or the picture of Catherine Bruce. I put the Venus de Milo up there with her because I wanted you to see her sense of humor as well. But that's Arbus on the phone, and that's Gary Winogrand. They used to run around together. This is a there she is, little devil. Hold on one second, I just wanted to show this again. Did I mess it up, guys? That's her daughter, Dune, and who's now her executor. So when I was Catherine Bruce Catherine, I also want to tell you something that I absolutely adore and think is so profound about her photographs, is that she's talking about capital a lot. She's talking about poverty a lot. She's talking about the ways in which the unacceptable have to live in the margins. And when you look at the floor, right, you see the mess of that room, you see the cheap beer can, and yet you see this incredible pride in tucking and becoming someone else and becoming the full self through becoming something else. but look at the curtains, right? Everything is this kind of stage set. And this is a picture that makes me weep every time I see it. It's a man and his wife, but what really kills me are the religious artifacts there, the clock and the television. And again, she's talking about the economic circumstances of people who are different. She never turns away from the fact that capital makes lives. She grew up in that, right? She grew up in a world where profit was everything. And she wants to know, what is it like to live without capital? This picture is an extraordinary thing because there's never a picture where someone is sad about who they are. She's always photographing pride in a way. So we have time for one more or so? Yes? There's someone down here I should say. Who has the microphone?
I have the mic. I don't know if I'm the
Oh,
only
okay,
person.
sure, hi. I can't
Hi.
see, so.
I'm sorry. So I have a question. So in the early 2000s, when the Revelations exhibit was on the road, I'm assuming when it came to New York that you were able to see it.
Yes.
And with the assumption of that, what did it mean to you, and what was it like to see all of her work on the mass at that moment in time?
That show blew my mind because they made environments. It wasn't just the photographs, but it was her bookshelves and the books that she loved, aspects from her apartment. And I'm going to tell you something. This is very weird thing that happened. I was really annoyed by other people in the museum. I didn't want to hear anybody else but her. When I was, it was like a sort of, the opening was a long line to get in, and I remember this woman was chewing hard candy in front of me, and I wanted to scream, "Don't you know you're in church?" So that show was a masterpiece of curatorial and emotional understanding. So it wasn't that you were entering just a gallery space with the photographs. You were entering her home. It was an amazing thing. And so there were vitrines, and they had the contact sheet that I mentioned. A lot in the book wasn't in the show. The book is bigger than the show. But Elizabeth Sussman, who was the curator, is just retired from the Whitney, and she's a great genius of difficult subject matter, making it accessible. But it was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen.
I remembered. Okay. There was a lady towards the second row.
I can't not hear, and who's? I can't hear.
Second row. She had like grayish hair. Yeah, and big glasses.
What? Is that a hot mic? Oh. Who are the mic people? Wave. I cannot understand.
That was the last question.
One more, and then we're done. Yes.
Someone wave.
Front row, I see.
She's been.
Okay, thank you.
We're coming to you.
You sort of spoke about my question when you started to speak about her fascination with her subjects, but I remember I always think about that series of the Halloween costumes, and I was.
You mean the when she went to the home in New Jersey? Yeah.
And I was reminded that when I went to go see this show, that it was up in Chelsea, that the conversation that was surrounding it was how controversial Diane Arbus's work was, and how it was very perverse, and it was pointing this finger at this subject that, like you said, we are trained not to look at. And so I'm kind of curious about her relationship to this idea of the perverse or the perversion of her subjects, and the line between her fascination or her admiration for her subjects.
I don't think she regarded it as perverse at all. I think she regarded the subjects as people, but one of the things that she says is that people who have lived with trauma or their trauma are aristocrats. They've lived through the worst of life already, and they've come out on the other side. And that was her view, that if you have survived long enough to reinvent yourself or to live in the margins and to let her photograph you or be public about your difference, you're the aristocrat. And so she always said that they were aristocrats. I think that it's never going to be over the idea of, I don't think we're ever going to be done with this idea of perversity in Arbus. I think that when we say that she's perverse, we're saying something about our own judgment of the characters in her pictures as opposed to how she treats them. She doesn't judge them. She's looking and working with them. And often developing, over, as I said, over many years, relationships with folks. I think this is one of the sexiest pictures I've ever seen. Hold on. And you don't want to know what's happened, but you do know what's happened, right? And he was again another person that she knew for a number of years. So the relationship of the body to photography, to oops. Sorry, guys. I was just going to go back to the contact sheet, but it doesn't matter. Oh, there. There she is. Yay! I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the war was to also talk about how in the 60s there was also something that was radically different for women, which is that they had the pill, and that her experiences didn't necessarily just have to be relegated to family, that her sexual and emotional experiences could be as wide-ranging as the photographs. So that contact sheet is super important as evidence of her ability to put her own body in the image to understand what photography was. Thank you all.